Well, welcome to the first chapter of this exciting course, The Art of the Attack. And in this chapter, we're going to look at different techniques that you can use to attack the uncastled king. Now, I would say that this is a good basic way to getting us into thinking the right way in attacking chess. Normally, your opponent will castle. That's not beat around the bush. It's most likely they will manage to get their king castle. But it's not always the case. And I've had many games where my opponent has done something wrong in the opening, not been able to castle, and taken advantage of that with very aggressive and active play. And that's what this first part of the book is looking at. We're going to build up to other areas of attack as we go through this. And I know Vladimir had some very interesting ideas with this, and we're going to cover all of them in this course. Now, things to sort of bear in mind for this chapter. The uncastled king, and to make an attack successful against it, really is only going to occur when one side does do something wrong in the opening. I mean, you don't see Magnus Carlsen, Peter Svidler generally losing by not castling their king. I actually said Peter Svidler and Carlsen because there was one game where Magnus Carlsen didn't get castled and Peter Svidler was able to crush him. But in general, this doesn't occur too often. So you've got to look out for those mistakes that your opponent are making in the opening. And you've got to play very energetically. And normally you'll need to break down some defenses, as Vladimir does talk about in the Art of the Attack text. And this is very important. So you've got to keep an eye out for those things. To start with, in this chapter, we're having a look at one of those things, which is the attack down the E file. So the E file is an area where the king is based. So often if one side is able to get castled and the other opposing king is on that file, there might be a way through to it with aggressive play. But again, this is normally a tactical sequence breaking down those defenses. And there are other things we're going to move on to, like playing against a piece that is protecting the king. So often the knight on f6, something like that, is protecting the king, or some bishop on e7. And we're going to move on to attack on the f7 square, the basic scholar's mate idea, where we try to quickly start an attack against that, which actually occurs quite a lot. But I think the best way to demonstrate this first chapter is to dive straight into a game. And we're going to be taking a deeper look at the examples that Vladimir put in his book. So this first example is a lovely demonstration of this attack down the E file. And again, these attacks against the uncastled king will really only work if one player makes a mistake. But you've got to be aware of when your opponent is making that mistake, and of course avoid making those mistakes yourself. So this game was played between two chaps, Meesen and Muller, and it was actually a correspondence game played in 1928 to 1929. And we're going to take in this course the side of the player I think you really should be looking at, and in this case that's black, the side we're trying to learn from. I think that's a logical way to set out the videos. So we're starting off by, as I mentioned, looking at attacks down the E file and when they can work at the early stage of the game when one side hasn't castled. This started with an English opening and the traditional 4 knights English opening, seen often in the Karpov-Kasparov matches, World Championships. And now White plays a move which is not one of the main moves, but a move I've played myself, pawn to d4, opening up the center and trying to get a kind of Maroczy bind setup. The main move in the position is g3, playing in reverse Sicilian style. So d4 played, and now black takes on d4 and plays the main move here, bishop to b4. And this move is aimed at creating some problems by doubling white's pawns and developing quickly. At the start of the game, you need to generally do three things: control the center, develop, and get your king castled, which one side does not do in this chapter. And now white plays knight takes c6. And this is the first mistake. It would have been more appropriate to have played g3 in this position. There's no need to capture on c6. Why is white doing that? You're capturing this piece, but without any real intention idea. The knight on d4 is perfectly okay. So you don't need to do this capture. Black avoided the queen exchange, captured towards the center, and now g3. And this is slightly inaccurate. I feel that this move is a little bit slow in this position. You've got to be aware of the dangers potentially that is, your position is facing. And a better move would have been something even like e3, even though then, you can't hope for any advantage. But this move is just a little bit too slow. And now black plays a good move, queen e7. And the idea is to counter white's plan. White's plan is clearly to go bishop g2 and to castle kingside in this position. And if white had now played e3 here, not king d2, but e3 in this position, then he would still be okay. But after something like bishop takes c3, this is still a better structure for black. But bishop g2 is a little bit slow because of very active play from black here. And again, to get these advantages in the opening, you've really got to look at weaknesses in your opponent's position and try to gain tempo, try to play actively. So can you see the move here? And this is actually a theme that we can tell occurs in other openings, mainly the Scotch. This setup, you can, maybe if you play the Scotch, you'll know about this. And the move which is best here is bishop a6, causing some issues against the pawn on c4. And you can see also x-raying towards e2. And now white plays queen d3. But this is the real problem. This is the real start of white's main issues. But already it's gone a bit wrong because of this clever idea of queen e7 and bishop a6, because it's very hard to defend this pawn. In actual fact, white should probably give this pawn up and just get castled, but then you're omitting defeat. Queen b3 is going to run into rook b8, for example. But after queen d3, this is another move that should bring out the red flags for us and be like, right, that queen lining up against our bishop, and the next move is very logical. b5. Simply increasing the pressure on white's position with our pawn now. And now b3 is played. And this is a very interesting moment. And now black plays extremely well to find, well, a winning combination here. It looks like the attack should occur somewhere on e2 or on c3. But the reason the next move does work is because of a number of small things that white have done wrong, or some big things even. I mean, he hasn't done anything that looks too serious, but again, in order to find these attacks in your own game, you've got to have the alarm bells going and think, okay, my opponent's done that move, that clearly isn't good, that's not good. And it's basically evaluating the position that will direct you towards finding the correct moves. So, for example here, we can tell that white's played this a little bit slowly. He's left his king in the center. He's moved his queen out. These are all things that you should be evaluating and raising your alertness to, should we even say category red? So we're like, right, we've got to look for the win. He's put his queen on this diagonal, and also now with this b3 move, there are weaknesses along here. Another thing to bear in mind throughout this course is timing. Timing is so important. If you've got time to continue your development, and we're talking about white here, so if white has time to castle and fully mobilize in this position, then black's going to have no advantage. Let's say white gets a couple more moves in. if we play slowly, we're castling here, we lose all our advantage. In actual fact, white may be better with his bishops cutting across the centre. So you've got to always bear in mind timing. And this real course that's one of the main things you're going to see throughout. It's about getting the timing right, evaluating that you must do something and finding the right move. So here, combining all these ideas, we want to do something quickly because white is really one move away from castling. So we should be looking for forcing moves that create threats. And d4 in this position is such a brilliant move. And the idea we're going to see very shortly, it's clear what the idea is in a minute. We want to quickly gain another piece into the centre. But before we look at what happens, queen takes d4, let's have a look at what happens with bishop takes c6 check. Well, king f8. And if bishop takes a8 here, we simply take on c3 and we're going to be a piece up at the end of the complications. And after that line, queen takes d4 here, it's quite similar to the game. Well, it is similar to the game, the same as the game. So the game continues with queen takes d4 first, rook to d8, and already white is now he can't hold on to all of his pieces. They're loose pieces. Bishop takes c6 check was thrown in, king to f8, and the problem is there's no way to hold on to this knight on c3 for the queen being attacked. So you have to really try blocking the rook's file, and bishop d5 is the only way to do this, and now the winning move. And again, throughout this course, what I suggest you do, you might be looking at the written things or the videos straight away. I'm going to often give you a chance to pause. So I'm going to say pause and try to get you into the position of the players, because it's one thing learning knowledge and being taught knowledge, but putting that into motion is the thing that's going to really give you that big improvement. You've got to use that knowledge, and that's why chessboard is so great. It keeps testing you with the puzzles. But here, if you can't see the winning move, pause now. The winning move is rook takes d5, and this is now showing how the problems on the e file are too serious for white. And after pawn takes d5, otherwise it's just a piece, queen takes e2 is checkmate. So a nice example there of white playing a little bit slowly, nothing too bad, but he did a couple of small mistakes which accumulated in disaster. The first one was knight takes c6. No need. Don't get rid of a developed piece in the center of the board. No need at all. And then g3. This is a little bit too slow. And bishop to g2 is not showing any sense of danger. Bishop a6, this combination of queen and bishop, very good. And queen d3 was really the last mistake here. But already things have gone a bit wrong. Very nice play from Müller. We now come to our second example given, which is the attack along the e file. Again, we saw this in the last game. It's quite amusing because when I was looking at this chapter doing my research, I assumed because it's attacks against uncastled kings, most of the examples would be given from the white perspective, because surely it's black getting into trouble quicker than white because white has the first move. But as we see here, we're already looking at two examples where black is getting white into trouble. So this is another game from a while back. It was played, I believe, in 1906, and it was played in Ostend in Belgium. I hope I got that right. Two legends of the game. We have Chigorin with the white pieces, has an opening named after him, and Byrne with black. So let's have a look at the critical moment. And again, what we have to remember throughout these first examples, which is easing our way into this amazing attacking course and to learn to attack in a better way, is that someone has to make a mistake in order for you to win quickly. But you've got to notice those mistakes and jump upon them. We have the King's Gambit. That is the first mistake. No, that's a bit of sense humour. It's not the big mistake. It's an opening, not so commonly played now, but still interesting. Great surprise value. And now bishop c5, which is a decent way to actually play against the King's Gambit. If you're looking for a line that avoids a lot of theory, this move's quite annoying for the player on the white side. I know because I play the King's Gambit. Knight to f3, and now simply d6, bishop to c4. I think it's best theoretically to actually play knight c3 first there, because in some lines the bishop can come to b5, particularly after knight c6. But this is okay. Knight to f6, and now white does actually play his first mistake. White plays c3. Now, the modern way of playing this position, if you're interested in the theory side of it, is knight to c3, and this knight aims to come over to a4 a bit later on after d3 to get rid of this very annoying bishop on c5, which is stopping white from castling. And again, I've played this myself on some occasions. c3 is a little bit slack, and you have to be very careful in the opening stages. And here black simply castles, but black misses the opportunity to actually grab the pawn on e4. And this really should be the first move that you consider. If there's a pawn that can be taken, if you can't see why it shouldn't be taken, take the pawn. Always try to play the most critical moves you can. Maybe, Chigorin was intending to play d4 here, but after simply capturing and flicking a check on b4, I really don't see where the counterplay is coming from. d5 is coming next. Okay, but they were both waking up to this game, clearly, and black castled, and now white played d3. If white's going to play this system, he's probably more advised to play d3 first to defend that pawn. Black develops, knight to c6, and now queen to e2. And this is okay, but it's not amazing. Let's put it that way. You're putting the queen on a square with the only idea is probably to go bishop e3 here to break this one. So if you're going to play a move like this, you should really try to be consistent. That's the way I feel. The whole point of c3 is to try and play b4 or d4. So one of those moves would have been more critical. d4 very risky with the centre open up, but b4 looked natural. And now Byrne plays rook to e8, and he sees the potential to do something because white still can't castle. White now tries to close things down with f5, and here a very good move. And this shows that Byrne is understanding some indications and evaluating the position correctly, meaning that, okay, white actually has quite a nice pawn structure. If white had the king on h1, if he could swap around the king and rooks, white would be better here, I feel, because then white has this sort of later on push g4, g5. These are long-term plans, but short-term, there are some problems. The king is in the middle. So what kind of things do we look out for here? Well, the king is in the middle there. If we're black here, we should be, right, how do I open up things towards my opponent's king? This is a very simple way of looking at it, and you've got to be aware of these possibilities. Our king is nicely safe. We've got some good development here, so it's definitely time to open up the position. Let's force our way through towards the king. So d5 is the correct move. Taking this one destroys white's pawn structure, so the bishop slips back to b3, and things may look quite solid in the centre here, but now I suggest you have a think about the right way to play here. And again, you've got to look for the warning bells. This is what this first chapter is all about. The king is on e1, can't castle, and we have the same three elements that we looked at in the last game. Can you remember those three elements? King on e1, queen on e2, rook on e8. Pretty basic elements. So when things are lined up like this, you've got to try to force your way through. And that's what this book as well is I'm trying to help you do with these videos. It's remembering those patterns so you can use them in your own games. So have a little think now, pause if you want to, but try to think what you'd play here. Well, it's right to try and force the position open. Remember, this whole course, this whole thing we're doing, it's about attacking chess. A lot of it's going to be aggressive, forcing moves. None of this positional rubbish. Obviously, I don't really mean that, because tactics will work from positions of strength. But you've got to be in the mood to go, be brave, roar like a lion. Was I going to say Ryan there? I don't know how Ryan, roars, but I meant a lion. So the correct move is bishop takes f5. And this is a great way to tear open the e file. This is stronger than any other option. I mean, taking on e4 first is not as good because after bishop takes here, we have less options because we don't have the option of taking on d3. And when you're looking for these tactical possibilities, even if you can't calculate all the lines, you want to go for the ones that give you more options. You might be able to work them out more further down the line. So bishop takes f5, very brutal move, and already white is in serious trouble. And he's just played a couple of moves which haven't been correct. I mean, this queen e2 would only have been okay if bishop e3, but not this slow way of playing, a little bit sleepy. And the point of this move is if white takes on f5, of course we play e4. And the important part of this is that white cannot stop the opening of the e file. And this is really a horrible position. For example, if the knight moves, doesn't really matter where, we take on d3 and we're actually winning the queen. So it's already game over. And after e4, if the king moves, which is not really what you want to do, we simply take on f3 and keep the initiative going. This is another very important thing about this course. It's about timing, but looking for moves that keep the initiative, powerful, energetic moves. And I hope you find more energetic moves by the end of the course. And knight to e5 is another such move, attacking, moving forwards, creating threats. And we're going to follow this up with knight g4 or d4 with a great position. So this is pretty horrible for white. So Chigoring, poor old Chigoring, is a fantastic player, actually decided to play bishop g5. But this is paramount to resigning at this level. Black simply takes on e4. And again, you always want to play in the most aggressive way. So you should be thinking, can I take here or am I going to get into trouble? If you can take the pawn, remember the rule, you should play the most critical line. And here, black can take the pawn. And the point being, well, white tried queen c4, but if white had taken on f6, we can just do some number crunching, crunch, and we're going to crunch the queen, and we're going to be serious material up. It's horrible for white. The game ended queen c4. Now, queen d5, a nice move. No need for fireworks now. We've got the two-pawn advantage, and after bishop f2, a simple tactic, white resigned. So again, you've got to keep an eye out for these warning bells if your opponent plays a bit slowly, when the e file can potentially open up in these positions. And, you know, these opportunities will occur. So you just got to be alert at every stage of the game. Another example about e file demolition. And this game is a game between Hansen with the white pieces, not Eric Hansen. I don't think he was around in the year of 1928. And his opponent, Lundin. And of course, with these names, it had to be played in Oslo. And one thing we're going to analyze in more depth through this course, and we're going to lead up to later on, is focal points. And this is already something I kind of mentioned, but use different terminology. And when I mean focal points, it's evaluating the position. And when you evaluate a position, you should be able to notice these pieces, these things, positions, whatever it is, something in the position that is a focal point that you can base your attacking play around. It might be a weak king, a weak pawn structure around the king. And in this case, it's undermining the defense of the key square. And that key square in this particular position is e2. This square here is the only square which is stopping black from busting through. So when we know what a focal point is, and you know we've got the open e file, we can evaluate that. We can't get through to the king at the moment because that bishop is in the way. But again, if we can force our way through that bishop or apply pressure even to that bishop, we picked a focal point and we can find a way to undermine the key squares. And this is often the case. So if the e-file is totally open, clear, open file, and there's only one piece on it, in this case it's white's bishop here, again another example from the black side, but it could be a piece on e7 with the king lined up. That is obviously going to be the focal point. That's the square we need to look for. And this is a good example of using a focal point to force our way into white's position. So have a think about this. It's black to play, and how did Lundin force his way through Hansen's defences here? And again, let's think about timing. These positions are important because white is one move away from getting safe. If white can castle kingside or queenside here, then white is okay. White is doing grand with a decent pawn structure. So, this is all about keeping the initiative. We're going to talk about these throughout the course, not letting any steam off the attack, and realizing what your opponent's also doing. If he has a move, he's going to get safe. We've got to try to stop him from escaping. So can you see the idea? And you should be looking for violent moves first. It comes back, and again, this is another thing I'm sure you've heard. Checks are the first things you look at, captures, and then threats, I'd say. So checks, captures, threats. When do you look at these things? When you have a focal point, when you can see that there's an area of attack. And here it is e2. So now there's no good checks, but rook takes d4 is a very nice and violent way here to force open the position. Now such a move works because white has not castled. He's got problems on the e-file. But also because black has so many active pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, and potentially the bishop. And the bishop on f8 does play a very important part in this tactical sequence as well. So it's a combination of factors. Now, if white takes this one with a pawn, which he didn't do, bishop b4 immediately is a major problem, winning a queen. So knight takes d4 is the best try. But now black simply takes on d4. You can see the pressure on the focal point, and white in this position cannot go queen takes because a queen takes e2. So he has to play pawn takes, and can you see the move now? Bishop b4. And this is putting pressure on the focal point, but undermining that square. So it's a distraction technique. What piece is really guarding the focal point? It's the white queen. We distract the queen away with a tactic to break through on that square. And here, there's nothing really white can do. White's going to lose the queen. If the queen takes the bishop, this is checkmate. King f2 was tried here, but after bishop takes d2, bishop takes g4, f5, we can see that white is losing. Couple more moves. Bishop takes d2. Pawn takes g4. This is clever because we're opening up another file. We've seen the e file. We have a rook. We're opening up the f file to attack along. Rook e1, and now queen takes d4. Queen takes b2, and simply rook to e8. And there's too many problems in this position. Black has too much material up, so Hansen resigned here. So other examples there of using the e-file, in this case, it's when there's a complete open e-file, and when there's nothing blocking that except for one piece, and that becomes the focal point. And one thing to keep in mind throughout this course is finding that main point of attack, whatever you want to call it. And you can do that by improving your valuation of positions, and we're going to keep that theme going throughout this course. So we're going to look at various techniques throughout the art of attack, which you can use to improve your attack in play. And the next one is a theme that we will see time and time again. And it's basically the way to play against a piece that's protecting your opponent's king. And we've kind of already seen this with the last position, the focal point. And you could even say here there's quite a lot of similarity. It's white to play in this following position. I'm going to ask you to have a go at solving this yourself. It's a position that the author of the original book presented, and it's a great example, because you have to find the right move in this position, otherwise you could be worse. This is what happens in chess, and you'll see that chess is all about critical moments. If you let the critical moments pass by not finding the right solution, you're going to be a much worse player. You've got to realize the critical moment, the focal points, and often calculate your way through. So let's have a look. Again, the focal point, bishop on e7. Clearly, because we got this open file, like we've discussed, against the uncastled king, but there is a piece protecting it. So what should we be thinking of here? Well, first of all, can we force our way through in this position? So we should be looking at ways we can take on e7. The first thing, seeing if that works. If it doesn't, we, again, when we're attacking, thinking of our own ideas, what a lot of people don't understand, and immediately you'll become a better player, is become a good attacking player, the art of attack. That's what this book is about. You must understand your opponent's possibilities and what he's trying to do. And here, black, of course, wants to castle when, if you know, he's generally going to be safe unless you have a clever solution to that idea of him castling. So we must think of a way to try to stop this. There's not really much else black can do, so we need to increase the pressure and try to stop him from castling. And in actual fact, there's only one correct move here. And you must find the correct way. You've got to increase the pressure and stop him castling, or if he does castle, have a very good solution against it. And I suggest you pause now to see if you have an idea about the correct way to go here. Something I'll ask you to do throughout this course if you haven't looked at the files, but I'm not going to keep you hanging for too long. Well, the correct move is bishop to f6. The reason this is the correct move is, okay, you allow black to castle, but you have a very standard pattern coming up, which is a queen and bishop on the dart squares around the opposing king. And this bishop allows the queen into h6, and really here, black has to castle. And this is the winning move. I mean, let's have a look at the other possibilities. Maybe in order to work this out, you may have started by looking at other moves. And the thing to do, nearly everything when it comes to forcing attacks will base itself on some form of calculation. And those forms of calculation are skills you can improve. In this position, you might look at, for example, queen e2 first, which looks very logical because you're increasing the pressure. But then you'd have to calculate as far as you can see and make another evaluation. And if it wasn't in the favor of white, the side we're trying to play here, you eliminate that move queen e2, or you keep it there, but you eliminate it and you look for other options in the original position. This is simply the art of eliminating lines, and this already is a way to improve your chess. So let's have a look. Well, at queen e2, you should have calculated, and remember, these are things you should do in your mind without moving the pieces. If you move the pieces, it's not a good way to learn. Should now be met not by castling, because you just simply win the piece on e7. Okay, great. But here, king f8. And even though I said black's two main ideas, his main idea was castling, I wanted to leave it a little bit ambiguous, because king f8 here is just a good move. And again, you're threatening the bishop, so it takes on a bit of a forced nature. We have to go bishop takes bishop. We have to try to keep some initiative. We are a pawn down here. So again, like a lot of things, if we let black consolidate, we're just going to be a pawn down, probably lose the ending. And in this position, there's not really many active ways to continue. You could try something like knight g5, aiming for f7, but hopefully you saw that black has knight f5. This knight is very well stabilized there with a pawn on h5. And there's no way white can get through here. Black will go king g7, put a rook on e8, queen on f6, super solid. So queen e2, if you saw this line, you had to calculate that as far as you could do, evaluate that black was better in that position, go back to this position and look at other possibilities. What other possibilities you might have thought about? Well, rook e2. And this is really not working because just castles. How's that helped you? It hasn't helped you. Having a rook here, you're not thinking of timing. If you went rook e2, you're not considering your opponent's best moves and you're not really going to the demands of the position. Now, rook takes e7 is a very aggressive try, and this is maybe a better try than we've seen. After knight e7, the best try here may be bishop f6, but in actual fact, there's a crafty defensive move in king d7. And in this position, with rook e8 coming, black is holding on and he's got the extra pawn. If you take the rook off, you're losing your main attacking piece. And in that last line, if you tried, for example, queen e2 here, well, black can go queen d7 and black can castle queenside. And even though white may have a small advantage, let's say after rook e1, and then queen takes e7, it's not anything serious. So if you evaluated this position, you got here and thought, okay, this is my best option, you're doing the right thing. But one very clever thing to do with all calculations, and again, this is a theme you'll see throughout the course, if you see a tactical idea, motif, in this line, it was rook takes, then bishop f6. Try changing the order of those tactics around. By doing that, you will often find a much stronger way to play that sequence of events. So by playing bishop to f6 first, if black now, let's say, castles here, well, now we can go rook takes e7, so it's the same idea, but black has forced put his king in this position. And here, what is the most important thing about this position? It's not the e7 knight. The focal point has changed. It's the g7 square. Checkmate is stronger than winning a piece. So by playing queen d2, this queen is really, really scary. So there's only one way to stop that one coming in, king h7. But now we have knight g5 check. The king has to go back. So we know we have a draw. And this is kind of a cheap method I would recommend you often use. And that cheap method is, if you can't calculate far down a combination, but you see you have a perpetual, and you're sure you do, it's not bad to have a draw. So you can kind of cheat, get to that position and recalculate. And here, well, we have this great pressure, rook e1. And now there's no good way that this can be defended here. This is just too strong. Too strong. Our rook is going to dive in, and we've avoided exchanging queens in this position. For example, rook e8 might be one of the only ways that you can try to save this one. And I may even let you guys just find the right move there. Remember, this is an everlasting. Well, you've got tempo. Black's going to try to go queen here. I mean, even simply queen to e3 is good enough. Just demonstrating that one line. And that basically means that black can't castle. I mean, again, if you're struggling to calculate these things, if you just calculate to that draw, perpetual draw, you can see, and you can clearly see a lot of these factors are very strong. The queen coming in, etc., etc. So, okay, what else can black do here? Well, black, if he doesn't want to try to castle and allow the queen in, he can try moving his rook. So rook f8. And what can you play here? And there may be even more than one way to play, because now we have more time, because black is not threatening to castle anymore. So you've got to be aware of these things. And pause now if you want to think of the right way to play. Well, I would always start by looking for the most forcing moves, because, you know, in a position of attack, you should be looking at checks, captures, threats. So there's no good check. So I'd definitely be looking at taking on e7. Now, bishop takes e7, knight takes, does not work. Black's going to go queen d7, castles. You haven't got enough pressure here. In actual fact, the bishop was a much better square, and you want to get this e1 square ready for the rook. So you can play rook takes e7, knight takes e7, and again, this is the focal point now. So queen e2, queen d3 will come to these ideas, could even be stronger, because we don't really want to swap queens. But again, if you calculate that after queen d7, rook e1, you're going to get a good position. And the point being here, if black castles, you can actually take on e7 with the bishop and you avoid the exchange of queens. Even though you walk into a pin, there's no good way for black to take advantage of this. So this is going to give white the advantage in the position. And this is a nice simple way to play. And if black tries something like queen e6 here, which is very risky, he should have given the material back, then queen to b5 check and queen takes b7 is going to be winning for white. So I think if we go back to this position, the most logical way to try and force it is by going for the capture. But if you're extremely clever here, you can even improve on that, and you can even improve on the lines that were given in the original book. And queen to d3 is an even better move. So you're combining those tactics, kind of, but you're swapping around the ideas a little bit. So you still have the idea rook takes e7, but this time your rook can come in. But you're also combining ideas of checking and taking on b7. And this is just a nice move. And you might better find such a move when you realize that black doesn't have a lot of time to do anything. The knight is blocking him castling, and he can't castle kingside. And here, after something, well, what can black play? Black can't do anything. There's actually just a deadly threat. A rook takes bishop and rook e7. There's nothing that can be done. Let's say you go queen d7 here. Well, we can go check and we can go rook here. And this is the best way to play, because after rook takes e7, let's say if he castles, we can even go bishop takes e7. There's no pins, there's no counterplay at all. So actually the best way to win is queen d3. But in some ways, I'm liking rook e7 because throughout this course, it's thinking in the right way. And aggression is key when you're attacking. And I want you to be looking at those forcing moves first. So nice example of breaking through a piece that is protecting the opponent's king. And we're starting to see some elements in these examples that will hopefully improve our attacking chess. This next example taken from a game played in 1943 in Moscow, and the two players were Ravinsky and Panov with the black pieces, was a very good example of a well-played attack combining the elements we've already seen. So down the open file, this one, the E file again, because the E file is where the king stands. So it's a natural file to attack along if we get a chance. And also playing against sort of a piece or a couple of pieces, these two knights particularly, that are protecting the king. We need to get rid of those knights. Now this kind of position here is, you might think I'll never get a position like this, but it's actually quite common to see something like this occur in an open Sicilian. And again, picking the right openings will often give you better chances to launch a devastating attack. You're very unlikely to smash your opponent's king up when he hasn't castled if you play the Reti system. You know, it's not going to happen. But if you play an open Sicilian, then you're much more likely to get these kind of attacks. So you've got to kind of pick the right openings to get you into these, well, you could say opening positions, but later on we're going to discuss middle game positions, because it's all about style. And especially as white, you should be forcing the way the game goes. You're in charge. You want to be controlling it, like you're controlling a symphony of, musicians. You are the conductor, and you've got to be moving them how you want. So it's white to play, and already I want you to start thinking about what you should do here. And to do this, again, I'm throwing you into the position. It's all about evaluating, working out those key pieces, focal points, as we've discussed, how you can break down those focal points, how you can combine your pieces that are working, if they are working as they are here, and what weaknesses in your opponent's position they have. And all these things need to be backed up by calculation. You're not going to be a good attacker, you're not going to master this art of attack unless you can calculate, I'm afraid, but you can always improve that. So how do we break down the defense? And pause again if you need to, and calculate as far as you can see. You know, visualization, again, it's always do a calculation, again, will make you a better player. Well, as I've said, the focal points and the pieces protecting the king are these two knights. So let's look for the most forcing ways to demolish them. Rook takes d7. And this is forcing the opening of the e-file and getting rid of pieces that are protecting our opponent's king. We're noticing it hasn't castled. We're trying to force through to the king. Knight takes d7. And now, what is the second wave? Again, the timing is essential here. With all this attacking, it's all about using the initiative and making sure you're using it in a way that works for the position. If black can castle, black is good. So the second blow now comes, ripping open the protection of the black king. The pawns there act as bodyguards, and in this case, you're taking them apart, dismantling them to get through to the king. Black really has to take this one because there's some devastating threats lingering. So the queen comes diving in. And now you kind of had your first branch. When you were looking at the first tactic, rook takes d7, you should have seen this position and looked at both moves, bishop f8 to e7 and king to d8, and made sure you had calculated an answer to both of them, which you evaluated as being better for white. Otherwise, this whole sacrifice should not have been played. Not all sacrifices work. If they don't work, don't play them. You're just going to lose pieces. So the first line we can look at is king to d8. And again, I'd be looking at the most forceful way to do this. And the most forcing moves, as we know, checks, captures, and then threats. And you can force checkmate here with checks. Let's bring in another piece. Bishop g5 check. When you're attacking, always look at your units, first of all, which are developed, which are putting the most pressure on. So in this position, the queen and the two bishops, if you can do anything with your developed pieces, then do so. Otherwise, bring in reinforcements. This last move was following that philosophy that you couldn't do anything in that position with your two active pieces, your queen or your bishop, so you're bringing in reinforcements. And in this position, it should be easy to shortly see that the open diagonals towards the king are deadly, and with queen c6 check, king b8, bishop f4 check, rook c7. Now we eliminate that one because we want to get to a8, and we will do with checkmate. So well done if you calculated that far. King d8 is not working. So what about bishop e7? Well, again, bishop e7 becomes a focal point here. There are two tempting moves, either bishop g5 or the move played in the game. And again, you should have calculated both of these and try to assess which is better. But the rook is a more powerful piece than the bishop, and we've talked about using the open file. So rook e1 is correct. And this knight, worth pointing out, can't really move because queen takes c8. So queen c5 now played, and this is a position which may have caused you some dilemma because we are a whole rook down. What do we follow up this position with? And remember, it should be checks, captures, and then threats. And remember, we should be looking at pieces that are protecting our opponent's king. What is now the focal point? Well, it is still the bishop, but you can now trace back other things that are holding that focal point together. And the queen is the other piece that's holding the whole position together. So the brilliant move played in the game, b4, is trying to distract that piece away. And the point of this is, if queen takes b4, we now play bishop to g5. Or, even better, bishop to f4. And this is a more slower way to do it, but there's nothing that black can do. The bishop is sliding into d6. And if king to f8, one of the only ways to remove the king from that line, can you see the move here? This is the only really sensible way to stop bishop d6. But again, we're now looking at a move like b4. If we can't do anything to the main focal point, trace it back. Can we do anything to the queen? Well, yes, we can. We can now play c3. And this queen is going to be overextended very soon. For example, queen c5, and only now bishop to d5. This stops any possibilities of black going queen takes e1, giving some material back to move the queen away. I mean, after queen b4, if you had looked at bishop g5 here, this is also good, but black can fight on by sacrificing his queen and then playing knight to f6, getting a blockade in the position. And if we go back to queen takes b4, and we even say, well, okay, do we need to play this move? Well, you do, because you can't go bishop g5. This is trying to allow our reinforcements to come in the position, or even bishop f4 is not going to be as strong now because, well, after king to this square, black can again have some sacrificial ideas of giving up the queen. But bishop f4 was certainly another option. But I like b4 because it's forcing our opponent's queen away to the wrong square. Well, the game continued just to show you knight to f8, trying to, make some exchanges, but now black can never castle. So white avoids exchanges. And the great thing about this, and throughout this course, you will notice that the attacker is often a rook down, but there's so many reasons the attack will work. This particular case is very open. Open lines. It means the attacker has the initiative. Open lines for the bishop. These bishops are fantastic. And all of white's pieces are attacking. All 4 pieces are attacking. So there's many reasons this works. But now queen g4 is the best move. Why? We don't need to always rush as long as we can work out we have time and our opponent is not threatening to get safe with his king. I like this move because we're keeping an eye on the rook and we avoid any exchanges. Obviously, we don't want to exchange off. Queen to c3 happened, attacking the rook, and now we can force our way through. The focal point, the only piece protecting, is the bishop. We've made the black queen move away from that one, so now rook takes e7 check. And our bishops are fantastic. Bishop g5 check, king d6, queen d1 check, king c7, bishop f4 check. Look at them coordinating beautifully together on these diagonals. And again, this requires very careful calculation, but instinctively, you should also see in these positions, instinctively, that white has a lot of play. And if you were trying to calculate rook e7, what I would say here, you can do the cheat, and you should have been able to see that if you go bishop e3 check, the king has to go here. If you go bishop f4 check, the king has to go here. And this is the cheat technique I was talking about, where if you see a perpetual, that means you can get to that position knowing you're not going to lose the game and rethink sometimes to see if there actually is a win there. You've got to follow your instincts sometimes to do this, but there is a win. And the win is queen d6. And now queen e7. And we can see the queen is trying to get to b7. So black has to give up a rook. And bishop takes c7 was played. Even better is bishop e3 check, forcing king here, and after king c8, queen b6 mate. So even Ravinsky did not play this correctly, but bishop at c7 is enough because you have 3 pieces attacking the lone king. And after knight g6, queen c5, king b7, bishop a5, the queen is now ready to come in. It doesn't matter that you're exchanged down. Black king too exposed, rook f8, and now queen b6 leading to an unstoppable mate, so black resigned. If king c8, queen c7, and if king a8, we have check. Hopefully you can see how this is working. If king here, check, check, checkmate. These are patterns you will pick up as you improve in chess. And if king to b8, we have check on this square. And this one is the same. We go check on b6. And if the king goes to this square here, it's the same with bishop b6 check. So very nice attacking game there. We're pan off on the receiving end. And what can we learn from that game? Let's just go back a little bit there. And I think what we can learn from that game is if we go back to the original position, we should notice that white in the original position, evaluate first. White's pieces are very good. The bishops are very nice. There's lots of open lines. What are the focal points in the position? The main points. The black king hasn't castled. The black knights are holding up the position. But we need to play aggressively and force our way through. Often that means sacrificing. And this position I think is easy to get to. But after bishop e7, it gets a little bit harder. Maybe you have to even follow your instincts in these positions. But after rook e1, we can see that our 4 remaining pieces are all going to be attacking a very bare king. And that should give us enough confidence, if we can't calculate to the end, to dive into the complications and to playing in such a way. Now, a famous game by Steinitz. Steinitz was probably better known for his more positionally founded ideas, but this game was a sparkling example of using the initiative, which is something you have to do when attacking, using the open file, as we're concentrating at the moment, and homing in on those key squares, those key ideas, when your opponent, particularly in this case, has not castled. So the game was played Hastings 1895, and this was just before the Open tournament, the longest running tournament in the world. And this was a very big tournament down in the south of England. And it's just a nice build up and then you know what I mean. Build up and then fire. My dyslexia sometimes slips in. So Steinitz started with e4. Steinitz with white against von Baden then. And we had bishop c4. So the Italian game, bishop c5. And here c3. So white's preparing d4 in a lot of cases. White doesn't play this line so often now because it's considered black has a couple of ways to equalize, but this is a nice straightforward way to play. In actual fact, Lawrence Trent used this plan to get a draw against Kramnik in the last couple of years, so it can't be bad. Knight to f6, d4, and now pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4, bishop b4 check. And black has to play this move, otherwise he's going to lose too much time. And remember, at the start of the game, tempo is very important. Sometimes timing in chess is much more important than other occasions. And at the start of the game, it's so important, as I hope I'm going to get across to you in this part of the book, in this part of the art of the attack. We can see that if one side doesn't get his king safe, then he can get a lot of trouble. Generally in positions which are very open and tactical, and they normally are when they're open, there's lots of pieces on the board because pieces can use those open lines to attack. Timing is much more critical. You haven't got time to mess about or maneuver too much. In more closed positions where the pawn structure is locked in the middle, you generally have a bit more time to do maneuvering. But obviously in these attacking positions, we want to try to get open attacking positions. So openings like this are the best way to play. Knight to c3 now played, and here d5, black counter-striking in the centre. Theoretically nowadays, obviously theory has moved on a lot in the last 100 plus years. Knight takes e4 is considered the best move, and black is okay with some careful play here. But d5 is reasonably logical, but again we can see the e-file is opening, so white doesn't want to lose any time. He captures on d5, castles quickly. Now the knight there is under attack. It's quite risky for black to grab a pawn here because they'd be losing more time, and there's also a tactic with bishop f7 and queen b3. So bishop e6 played, and the way that white plays this game is really just straightforward, and it's nice. White develops at a tempo, so he tries to do moves that improves his position and gains tempo, and one such move is bishop g5, getting the last piece off the back rank and gaining tempo. Now, the idea also is to try to soften up black's pawn structure. So if black plays a move here like f6, he's softened up this point of contact, which we've already talked about, point of contact on an open file. And white would have ideas such as rook e1 now, which is quite unpleasant for black here. So it's a move that's trying to develop but induce a weakness in the opponent's position. Well worth looking out for that, making moves that can weaken your opponent's structure. Now, queen d7 would be probably the best way to play here, a much more solid move. I mean, after bishop e7, the move played in the game, white now carries out a series of exchanges to keep pressure along the e-file and stop black from castling. Again, this position is critical. It's all about timing. If black is castled at any moment, black is absolutely fine. Again, to realize when, how urgent your position is. And a lot of these positions, the winning side finds the right plan, often because it's a matter of urgency. If they don't find the right plan, then it could end up being worse. I mean, for example, here, if we're going to evaluate, and you need to constantly evaluate the position to work out how much time you've got, how urgent it is to try and create this attack, we can start by looking at the pawn structure, which I call the skeleton of the position. And here we can see that the pawn on d4 is an isolated pawn. We're all isolated at the moment, aren't we? But this is an isolated pawn. And what that means is it can't be defended by another pawn. It has no neighbourly pawns to it. So it's a bit on its own, a bit lonely. And this can be good for the attacking side, but also later on, if your opponent can consolidate, it can become weak. It can be a target to attack. So we can see pawn structure-wise, white needs to play with energy. So he takes on d5, opening up lines. Black recaptures, capture again on d5. Queen takes d5, taking on e7, and we have this familiar situation where we're trying to attack the uncastled king along the e-file, and there's one piece in the way protecting that king, the knight on e7, but that is clearly our target piece that we want to base our pressure around. And of course, the best way to do that is rook e1, taking over the file. And again, if you get an opportunity to do this at the start of the game, grab it, but you must play with energy to stop your opponent consolidating. Now, black played f6 here to stop a piece coming into e5. I mean, another logical move after rook e1 would be queen d7. But white should now be thinking about how can we stop black from castling. Again, being a great attacking player is all to do with not just your own moves, but stopping your opponent getting his king stave, stopping your opponent doing something. So what move would be best here? Well, of course, it's queen e7, because he can't castle because of the capture here. And this keeps a lot of pressure still on the position, and it's not clear how black will play. So another reason f6 is played immediately is that black suddenly figures out he can't easily castle, so he's trying to do it in an artificial way by moving the king, moving the rook. But again, our what I would call spider sense this should be going, because we should be thinking, well, hang on a minute, that's going to take 1, 2, 3 moves for him to castle. So I've got a bit of time to generate an attack before he gets safe. So the next move, queen e2, is a standard way to increase the pressure, as we've said. Queen d7. And now the last piece comes into the game, rook on a to c1. And actually this is working quite nicely by applying that pressure there on c7. So black now makes a critical mistake. In this position, black had to play king f7. He had to try and get his rook to e8. This is one of the basic priorities at the start of the game, and even here in the middle game. King safety, real priority. And now white only... I'm not even sure if white's that much better here, because you have this pawn weakness and black's about to consolidate. So often in these lines, you are waiting on your opponent to make a mistake, but you can do this by natural play, by putting under as much pressure as you can. In the game, black didn't understand how critical the timing was, and he played c6, which is a luxury he does not have. After the move c6, white now plays fantastically to keep the pressure on black for the rest of the game. This is not a critical thing for black to be playing. King safety is prime. And noticing such a move and taking advantage of it is really very difficult to do. And you've got to, in this positions like this, look at all your pieces, realize again you have a little bit of time, but you've got to play with such energy. When you have a slight initiative, it needs to be really backed up with energy. It's like, it's like anything. When the energy dies, the light goes out, and you need to keep the light burning. So how can you improve your pieces? Another thing you should be doing in these positions is look at your pieces that are doing a good job. The queen and rook there are. The rook there is. But the knight on f3 is not, because it can't come in anywhere. And by playing the excellent move d5, white gives up a pawn to get the knight straight into black's position. A very active space clearance move. And this again is very logical if you know what to look for in a position. Now black can only take this with the pawn, otherwise the point of contact drops. And now knight d4. And this knight now has ways into the position where it will really apply pressure to black's structure. So black must try king f7. The knight dives in, the immediate threat now being rook to e6. So black tries to cover the c file. And here you've done this sacrifice, so you're in a position where you have the initiative. You should always be looking for the immediate move, so the checks, the captures. But don't forget about the threats. Lots of people, they get these positions, and if you can't force a win, then you should be looking at ways to make your opponent's life as uncomfortable as you can. So look at ways to create threats. I mean, there aren't any immediate moves here. Something like knight takes g7 does not work because of rook c1, and you're going to be losing. If you can't force a position, then you have to find other ways through. And the move queen g4 is perfect. The queen is a very important attacking piece, and here you're creating two threats, g7 and knight g5. Knight g5 is a mini threat. It can be defended, but it puts the opponent's king under pressure. So g6 played, and, well, now knight g5. And the next combination is certainly, as written by the author of The Art of Attack, certainly one of the greatest combinations of the 19th century. And it's really quite beautiful. Knight g5. So where does the king go? Well, it has to go to e8 because of the queen. And now it's that energy, white playing with energy. And again, it's that e file, finding the point of contact, in this case, the knight on e7. If we can get rid of that blockading knight, we will have a great chance of launching an attack. This pressure on the diagonal here means that after rook takes e7, that black is in a lot of trouble. What does black play? He can't play queen takes now because of rook takes c8, winning immediately. If king takes e7, then we can look for the forcing moves. We've cleared up the e file, so we can simply go rook e1 with the idea of winning the queen. And we have some major threats. So the king goes to d8, we have knight e6, and then knight c5, a lovely what we call discovered check. Again, this is calculation, which you need to build up. If king d6 here, then we have queen b4 check, a nice swinging move there. And the rook is threatening to come into e6, so king c7, but now knight to e6 and swinging back to f4 with a winning attack. So black figures that king f8 is the only chance he has because of some weaknesses on white's back rank. But now we see a really clever maneuver. Maybe it's a good time for you to try and pause and see if you can find the great play that white found in this position, which he must have seen in advance. But I do say that, I mean, again, if you see these tactics and your calculation is not quite there yet, you often have to go into it with a gut feeling. And I'm sure here, if we look at the position and seeing how weak the black king is, you would have a gut feeling white is doing well. And now with the move rook f7, we have a very weird way to try and draw. So this is an amazing move. Other options don't work because of this rook takes c1. So on the level of urgency and timing, we're at critical because of our back rank. So we must be looking for those most forcing moves, checks. So rook f7 is aimed at diverting a black piece away from its defensive duties, something we're going to see time and time again. If queen takes, then c8 is open to attack, so we simply take there with a winning position. And, well, what else can be done? Oh, excuse me. So let's have a look at that again. The king has to move. It can't move now back to e8. Let's just see why. If it does move back to e8, queen takes d7 as mate, so it has to go to g8. And again, you've got to keep looking for those forcing moves. And again, the beautiful move here is rook g7. Fantastic stuff. Again, this rook can't be taken. If king takes, queen takes d7, is capturing with check. And if queen takes g7, yet again, we can now get way to c8 with check. So where does the king go? Well, the king has to keep going into the corner. And now rook takes h7. And apparently there's a funny story here. Steinert's opponent, and there is a quote here after this story. Apparently Steinert's opponent left the tournament hall and never reappeared. And by those offensive means, it was said he had hoped to deprive Steinitz of a piece of immortalities. So this is where the game officially ended, and there's a quote here doing a von Baldenben for players who, in such bad sports, they just leave without resigning and allow their time to click down. Very morally wrong. But we can see here, and obviously the bad loser could see as well, that white is going to win for a very nice sequence. What is the sequence? Can you work it out? Because now we've opened up the h-file, meaning the queen can come in. Again, this can't be taken because of c8. So king g8 is forced. We now come back to g7. This can't be captured. I should have mentioned before that if the king comes to this square, what do we have? Look for those checks. Well, the simplest move here is actually knight h7 check, forcing the king to take, and again we take the queen with check. So after king h8 coming back, queen h4 would have come, and now the following force sequence. And again, this is something you'd have to calculate ahead, but it should be something you can do quite easily because all the moves are checks. And throughout this course, I'd say pause and try to do it yourself, and this is another case, but the win is queen h7, queen h8, and now king has to be forced into a very bad position here. King to e8 is probably best. If the king comes here, can you see the way to do this? Well, simply queen takes f6. So king to e8, and now queen to g8, and the queen gets a little bit nearer. And after king d8, we get a little bit nearer again. Has to block, and now checkmate in 2 moves with this brilliancy. So very lovely game there from Steinitz, and you know, some little things to take away from that. Black did not play as carefully as he should have done with his king. He made this big mistake, and the main mistake of having the luxury, or thinking having the luxury, he could play c6 here, which is a bit too slow. But then it took very energetic play on white's part to convert. He saw this pressure on the e-file, especially on e7, and he wanted to think how he can increase the pressure of his pieces, and there's something you need to do. The queen and rook are great, the other rook's great, but the knight there's not doing anything. And a good little technique here, before we move on, that you can use is remove the piece which is your worst piece, take it off the board, think of a square where you'd love to put it, in this case e6, and think how you're going to get it there. And then you'll find it easier to find moves such as d4 and knight d4. In such positions, a pawn is a mere it's a very good investment for any attack. So very nice play from Steinitz in a very famous game there. So now we move on to a new segment of the course on attacking the uncastled king, our basic start to learn to be a great attacking player. And we're now concentrating on another theme. So we've looked at the open e-file and how we can get pressure along that, combining sort of topics we're going to come to later on in the course, like pieces in the way, important pieces we need to get rid of, focal points, as is stated in the great work. And in this game, we're concentrating on one of the first things we learn in chess, and that is the weakness of the f7 square, or f2 for white in the starting position. Now, when I used to teach in schools, this is one of the first things I used to teach. I'm sure you're aware of, obviously, that the scholar's mate, fool's mate idea of pressurizing f7 immediately, which, is a nice little trick when you're learning chess, but quickly runs out of steam. And this square is weak because it's only defended by one piece, the king. And every other square around the king is defended by multiple pieces. Now, one of the main times f7 comes under attack is in actually Philidor openings. So this is a bit like the black line. The black line is a Philidor. If you haven't got my black line course, frankly, you insult me. No, I'm only joking. You don't insult me. It's fine, but you can learn more about those structures by buying my Chessable course there. So this square is often very weak, and even later on, when black castles kingside, it can become a sort of route into attack, even though it's defended by the rook. We often see cases of the smothered mate, which starts on this square as well. So we will need to get a bishop and sometimes a knight in to combine these methods of attack. So let's just have a look at some ideas like evolved around this one. And we're going to start with e4. And this is probably the best move to get a quick attack, it seems, because the bishop can come out quickly and aim for that square. And after e5, knight to f3, d6, which is really the Philidor kind of setup. Bishop c4 now. And here, white is already getting pressure against this square. And one mistake that has been seen here, which is a very illogical move, and again, to win quickly in the opening, your opponent is going to have to play some strange moves, but it will happen to you. Knight to e7. And clearly, this doesn't make much sense. The bishop will have to try to come to g7, but black is not looking at white's ideas, and this is one of the basic mistakes in chess, not looking at what your opponent's lining up. And now knight g5 is going for that square, the weak f7 square immediately. d5 is a way that black can try to defend this, and we see this also in other strategies, like the line in the Raw Lopez when white plays this one with the really weird name that I'm trying to remember now. Maybe you can help me out. But it's the same strategy there. We capture on d5, keeping this line opening, not losing a tempo, and knight takes d5 now. And here there's a couple of good moves, but one strong move is queen f3, starting attack against the weak square and the knight. Obviously, there's other tempting options here as well. I mean, another very good move would be d4, just opening up the position. And you want to open up the position when your pieces are better developed than your opponent's and your king is a bit safer. Here, our king can castle in one move. We can all even go back to the other strategy of attacking on the e-file. Another common idea is knight takes f7, followed by queen f7. And that's the opening I was mentioning earlier on. But queen f3 here works very well. Queen takes g5, pretty much forced. Bishop e6 is just ugly. We can capture on e6 and go queen h5 check, winning a pawn. I suppose queen takes g5 is not much better, because after bishop takes d5, black is losing at least a pawn. f7 and b7 under attack, and after something like f5, we can safely take on b7, and if e4, swing around to defend that bishop. And if black tries queen takes g2, the rook can just come to f1, and the rook on a8 is dropping. Black doesn't have enough counterplay. He's only got one piece attacking. If black somehow had the knight coming into d4 here, it'd be a totally different story, but we should easily be able to stop that plan. So this is a very basic example of the attack on the f7 square, and it's always worth obviously looking out for that if you get an opportunity. And we'll move on to other examples of this now. We're now going to move on to a slightly more complex example of that. Well, anything's a bit more complex than that last example, and often things will combine ideas when you're going to use a successful attack. And this next example combines the idea of e-file pressure and pressure against f7. Now, as we know, this f7 square is the weakest square earlier on, but the e-file is also black's main problem. So black does have to be careful. I mean, we've mentioned that when black castles, f7 is guarded by the rook, so it's a bit more better protected. And we'll come to other forms of attacking the castle king later on in the course. But you really have to play energetically in all of these sort of games we've seen so far in order to make these attacks successful. And this is a key point, energy. And that's something, you know, in this art of attack, Vladimir tries to get across throughout. And it's that initiative. And this is going to be good for our chess to learn to play in such an aggressive way. It can only improve our game. Now, the next game played in 1950. We have Keres with the white pieces, and Keres's opponent is Kotov. Kotov, very strong player, a famous player as well, which I'm sure a lot of you know. And this was a high-level game, so not as simple as the last one, but still with the same sort of ideas. E4, and we had a Sicilian open Sicilian, and now the Najdorf variation, A6, which is still one of the most popular lines, if not the most popular variation of the Sicilian, favoured by Bobby Fischer, Garry Kasparov, and nowadays MVL, to name some players. And it makes a lot of sense. Black wants to start counterplay with b5 and keep his position flexible at the moment. Bishop e2. And a bit surprising that f7 is going to be a target here when we put our bishop on e2. Bishop c4 is another way that white can play to try and target this immediately. And another very common theme in those positions after black plays e6 is some sacrifice on e6. This is another common theme in the Sicilian when the knight comes to d7, followed up by the knight diving into that square. But bishop e2 is a safe, sensible developing move. And here, queen c7. Not sure that's necessarily needed here. So white plays the most aggressive move now, trying to take advantage of this, bishop g5. Sometimes taking the knight and gaining a very useful tempo with knight d5. So black goes knight b d7, backing up that knight. White castles, e6. In this Najdorf variation, black aims to put the bishop upon e7 and castle kingside. And now Keres comes up with a very interesting idea. And this is certainly a unique idea to me in the Sicilian. And it only works by placing the bishop here. I think most people here would either go with some f4 plan or try to connect the rooks by moving the queen, probably to d2, so it doesn't get hit by a knight jump. But we should note in this position that some of the elements we talked about are already there. This e-file has a lot of pieces in the way of it, but white does have some options of moving the rook there and opening it up if he gets lucky with a typical sacrifice of the knight on one of these two squares, d5 or f5, another common theme. Black hasn't castled. It's going to take him a couple of moves to do that, but he should be fine. So white realizes in this position, okay, well, actually, I can play very energetically here, and I can try to punish black for playing these quite slow moves, especially queen c7. And white now plays the extremely interesting bishop to h5, targeting f7, but through the targeting of f7, creating a threat on e6. And this is quite a dangerous move, and this is a great way to play. I mean, the quicker you can put safe pressure on your opponent by basic threats, the better. That is if it's not detrimental to your position. Remember, cheap threats that make your position worse, like Scholar's Mate, where you bring your queen out early, are not good. You don't want to do threats that weaken your position, but threats that either try to tempt your opponent into making a weakness. And the idea here is to try to tempt black into playing g6, which black had to play. And white was figuring that this is weakening the dark squares. The bishop maybe can come back to f3 or even to e2. And now if bishop g7, we have ideas even a knight b5 that black needs to consider, another common theme, giving up a piece to start an attack. And if the bishop had gone to e7 here, you can see that white has even a possibility of bishop h6 stopping this castling. So it's a very interesting idea. Now, Kotov doesn't like that variation and plays queen c4 instead, trying not to weaken that's the position with this g6 move. But this is actually a mistake, which white very energetically now uses to his advantage to get a very good position. And you may want to try to work this out again yourself. So this is your pause opportunity. Going all the way back to 1950 now, and obviously most of the games in this course and the art of the attack are older games, which I quite like because they're games I haven't seen. And they are the origin of modern day play. And the origin of anything is very important. Can you see the move? Well, now, the amazing possibility that white has, and it's something you always look out for when you're playing these positions with white, knight takes e6. And we mentioned this idea before. Working because of pressure on f7. The point of this sacrifice is to get the d5 square. So after queen takes e6, which is forced, knight d5. And again, we're combining this idea of the open e-file here with some deadly threats. So in this position, black found himself in a helpless situation quite quickly. He played king d8, defending this major threat. The only other way to defend this is to eliminate the knight on d5, but this obviously comes with its own dangers. Pawn takes d5. The queen now has to go to f5. And here, the best move is actually queen e1 check. Now, I would like to mention around here that in the original text, The Art of Attack, it was obviously analysed without top computers. So even though the essence and the ideas are there, some of the calculation things that Vladimir uses aren't the best moves now with modern computers. And he gives the line rook e1 check, knight to e5 and f4, which has some pressure, but black has wriggling room here. But the improved version of this is to play what is maybe a funny looking move, but queen e1. And the whole point of this idea, again, is f7. We can use our rook in a lot of lines to attack f7. We get an extra piece in the attack. And after knight e5, which is forced, let's just go to that position, f4, we have this devastating idea of taking on e5, and black is in a helpless situation now. For example, h6, we can take on e5. Now black really has to try to grab some material, so queen takes g5. But after e takes d6 check, that black king is not going to last a long time. And another very crafty idea having the queen here is it can come out to a5. So let's say king to this square, d8, queen a5 is crushing. So really embarrassing position already for black. And it doesn't look like black's done a lot wrong. So very unique idea. I like this idea a lot. Now, after king d8, again, you need in these positions to try to find immediate wins or play with a lot of energy. As soon as you take your foot off the throttle, your car is going to stop and someone's going to overtake you. So bishop g4. applying more pressure to the queen. The bishop has done its job on h5. This is the star piece. The queen comes to the most active square it can find, but now f4. Queen takes e4, and now the idea behind white's play, the queen is no longer defending the knight, so we can undermine that square with bishop takes d7 and knight takes f6. White wins his material back with an attack, with the initiative, and shortly with extra material. So actually a very simple win there against an incredibly strong player. And black in this line didn't do too much wrong. If we go back to the opening after bishop e2, you could even say this queen c7 was the start of all his problems, and then the rather optimistic queen c4. But in order to capitalize on these ideas, you have to be well aware of the possibilities in the position. And of course, Keres was up to the challenge here. So we're now going to look at different aspects and different ways that white lands an attack on f7 quite early. And, myself, I can remember a couple of examples against very strong players where I've managed to break through on this square. And you've got to pick the right openings to give yourself these chances. Like I mentioned before, open Sicilians, e4 openings will give you many more chances of landing an attack like this. But all of these things are based on really pattern recognition, which we're going through, the f7 square, and backing that up with calculation and spotting possibilities. Another game of Keres here, played 15 years before the last one in 1935. His opponent, Winter. And again, this is another lovely example of tactics based on this square. We have, in this case, a slightly different opening, knight f6, and this is quite a rare Sicilian line, probably for a reason. I do believe one game of the highest level was Grandilius of Sweden playing knight to f6 against Magnus Carlsen, but it's probably more used as a shock value than anything else. And when your opponent plays a bit of an odd move in the opening, which will happen, you should always think, okay, well, why don't I recognize that move? Why is that move not in my mind bank somewhere? It could be because you can't remember it, but it could also be that there's a reason. It's not the best move, and you should aim to look at ways to punish that. And that's kind of the case with this move. It's an okay move, but it's not the main line, and there's a reason for that. And you should look at ways you can gain tempo, look at ways you can attack, look at ways you can gain initiative when your opponent plays a peculiar move. And e5 is obviously the right way to go because it gains a tempo, gains space, kicks that knight around. Knight d5, and now I like the next move, knight c3. And the point is, if black takes, we take with the d pawn, and we're opening up lots of lines for our pieces, and we have this pawn and knight. This is already very bad for black. So e6 is black's idea, and now white captures on d5 and plays d4. Sensible, solid, central, developing play. Black goes d6. He has to get rid of his horrible double pawns. And now again, very good play. When your opponent plays in such a way, look at energetic moves that gain tempo and develop, improve your position. One such move is bishop g5. This move is attacking, developing in a sensible fashion. Now, bishop e7 is the kind of move that black would like to play, but he does now go for queen a5 check. And you can see he's starting to make some small errors. Because after c3, he's underdeveloped, and with his next move, pawn takes d4, he's getting greedy. And it's clearly now a case from our side of white that black is grabbing pawns, but he's leaving his king in a very precarious position. We have this pawn here which can help attacking chances. And if we can think of a way of developing quickly here, I would be looking at the e-file, as we've done earlier on in this course. We can start a very quick attack. Now, bishop d3 was played, and this is certainly just the most logical move, developing, trying to get a rook to e1 straight away. Actually, e6 is funnily enough, a very interesting possibility. And we saw this actual idea in the Steinitz game. Can you remember that? What I'd like to do throughout this course is try to point out these patterns that you should start to recognize. This is what chess is all about. It's a game of patterns. We're looking throughout this course how you start to recognize patterns and ideas. So weaknesses in your enemy's position, but also your own possibilities to become a better attacking player. Learn the art of the attack. Sounds very samurai, doesn't it? The art of the attack. The art of ninjutsu by Miyamoto Mitsubishi. Sorry, I'm thinking what's it? Goring no Shai? Is it the Book of Five Rings? And I probably pronounced that samurai's name incredibly wrong. But this actually has a similar theme to what we looked at earlier. And the idea is if bishop takes, we take on d4 with our knight and we give up a pawn to generate some quick play here. And sacrifices like this are certainly worth, keeping your eyes open for. And one pawn is nothing to invest to get such a position. But bishop d3 is fine. And now black continues his greedy ways by taking on c3. I suppose he's a bit committed now, but white castles. Takes on b2, in for a penny. Rook b1. And already this position to me looks horrible for black. The pawns are totally irrelevant when your king is stuck here. Pawn takes e5. Greedy, greedy boy. Knight takes e5. And now bishop d6. And I think in this situation in the game, all of white's moves have been fairly logical here. You've developed and you've played good natural moves. And another thing I find very useful for me is that if I'm in an opening position and suddenly I look at the position, I get a little bit pessimistic. I suddenly think, oh, hang on a minute, maybe I miss a move from quite early on in the game. And I think, oh, I missed that move. What have I done? One way I find to calm myself down is to think, right, okay, have I done anything wrong to deserve this to happen to me? Obviously, with my moves in the game, I'm not talking about karma. Even though I'm pretty strong with my karma game. And I think, okay, well, if I haven't done anything wrong, if I've just done the normal things we should do at the start, developing, controlling the center, castling, why should I be in trouble? Hang on a minute, don't panic. I'm not in trouble. I've done nothing wrong. Actually, this move that surprised me, there must be something wrong with it. So it's my opponent that should be in trouble. And this would be the case here. It's like, okay, I might be thinking, okay, my opponent is now 3 pawns up, but I've developed my pieces. I've done nothing wrong. And okay, well, hang on a minute. What's going on here? Well, I'm looking at the position and thinking, well, clearly if I play a move like rook e1, which is very logical, my opponent can castle. And unless I have a good move here, I've allowed him to castle. I don't really want to do that. And it does look like white might have some attacking chances here, but there's nothing completely, obvious, because if queen comes in, g6 or f5 can block this attack. So I would be thinking in this position, okay, well, he wants to castle. We know this. This is time after bishop d6 to look at ways to, crush him. Even if I have to sacrifice something, because other things, remember, evaluation is so key that make my opponent's position a bit dodgy. He hasn't developed any pieces over here, so I'm effectively a piece up. And with this way of thinking, you should be looking again for those things. It's these moments in a game. We know during this course, because I'm telling you they're there, but I'm trying to teach you how you think in the right way. So in a real game, you're not going to have someone go, oh, there's a move here, play the move, unless you're cheating. You have to work it out for yourself. So you've got to have these kind of alarm bells that think, okay, well, I remember that from that course. I know in this position, because I'm evaluating it correctly, that I have a move. And here is certainly the case. So checks captures threats. And there's no checks, but knight takes f7. This theme of the weak f7 square is clearly a dangerous move. And again, we just got to think logically. We're bringing the queen in. We're going to have 1, 2, 3 pieces attacking. And 3 pieces is actually a magic number in an attack, often good enough to win the game. We potentially have another open file. And after king takes f7, the black doesn't have much protection. So queen h5 check. I mean, as general, and this is something, again, the author does point out, Vladimir here, the sacrifice on f7 must be followed up with aggressive action. And this is the same with most sacrifices. Not always, but this must be. You cannot allow black time to consolidate when you sacrifice, generally. And if black had time to go like rook f8 and king g8 there, he could castle by hand. And this has two main advantages. This sacrifice in this particular case, black can't castle, and we have this strong pressure with our light square attack. So what can black play here? But of course, when you're going into this sacrifice, you would have needed to calculate the following lines beforehand. Train yourself to do that by looking at puzzles. Now, g6 is played in the game. We can have a look at what happens if the king moves. Only has 2 squares to go to. If it goes to f8 in this position, we now combine the first idea we thought about, and that's the open e-file with rook on fe1. Another thing I'd like to bring to this move is something I found very useful personally when I'm attacking, and that is, I've mentioned this before, but if you're attacking, look at your developed pieces, think, okay, can I do anything with them? So let's do that. Can I do anything with these pieces? And there's not anything obvious here. If not, you look at ways to bring in reinforcements. Simple analogy when you're attacking. This check doesn't really help me, so this one does, because I threaten something strong. I bring another piece in. And after bishop d7, we have a typical idea, the rook swinger, bringing in that reinforcement, rook e3, coming around to this square, and black is helpless. There's no way to defend. So great use of bringing in reinforcements. Now, if king to e6, come to daddy, I'd be thinking, can you find the correct solution to this position? And remember, simple is good. You don't need to overcomplicate positions if there's a simple way, and this position there is. So, pause time. Have your finger on the trigger, on the pause trigger, to stop me from singing anymore. Well, bishop to f5 check is the best move. And again, this is just the kind of aggressive, very positive move you should be looking at. Bringing your opponent's king further into the danger zone. And here, the simple bishop to d2 check, winning the queen, is good enough. This is a very human move. The computer does point out nowadays that moving the rook here actually leads to checkmate with g4 ideas. But I would only play this move if I was 200%, convinced it would work. Otherwise, I'd move my bishop, maybe d8 or d2, because I know that would win. And I'm lazy. It's good to be lazy. If you don't need to calculate, don't calculate. But you will generally need to calculate in a game of chess. So g6 was now played, because the other options we've seen are bad. And now, of course, we've got to play energetically. And this bishop takes g6 move is the typical way of doing that. And now queen takes h8. So we get back some of our material, but we're also keeping threats alive, and we have the attack. Bishop f5 is as good as move as any. Attacking, developing that bishop. And now bringing in the reinforcements. There's nothing we can do with these two pieces. So rook fe1, the e-file, bringing in the third piece to the attack. The one threat that's very strong here is just queen h7, bishop h6, checkmate. So black has to block the e-file. And again, I like the next move in the game that was actually played by Keres. Rook takes e4. Keres was a brilliant attacking player because, again, this forces the issue. There was another way of doing it, and you can actually do it through checks, starting with queen to f6, and now queen to e6, and this would eventually force checkmate with these pieces and a potential rook swinger, and I think you can see that happening. So that was another way of doing it. But rook takes e4 is a move I would definitely consider because I just want to get rid of that piece. And after d takes, you obviously have to now calculate that queen f6 is working. One good thing about this position is that if you can't calculate the checkmate, you can always calculate that you can take the piece back and you're then only a small amount of material down with very good play. But here we can do it by taking pawns first, check, and here queen takes d6 check. Black resigned, his position is helpless, in actual fact, the combination of these two pieces will eventually force checkmate. I'll leave you to ponder that for a little bit if you want to work out. Often the queen and bishop in such situations, by using so-called criss-cross techniques, can force checkmate. Two strong pieces against a lone king is sometimes good enough. So very powerful display by Keres there. Again, taking some great moves and attacking possibilities, but rather poor play from his opponents. And again, these are the warning signs to look out for when you're trying to launch these devastating attacks. Now, The Art of the Attack, as been mentioned, is a classic book, and Vladimir put a lot of work into finding some brilliant examples during the course of the book, but it does need a little bit of updating, the original text, and that's something that Chessable have done a fantastic job of doing with the hard workers. And this next example is actually an example where the author did get things wrong, even though it's not so obvious to see. So I'm just going to show you this. We want to keep as close to the real text as we can, but if there is a mistake in the real text, I'm kind of updating it here with the videos as well. The next position is a position that was reached in a game where the player of the black pieces is not known. I'm not aware of the player of the white pieces, Valerian. Sounds like a place from the Game of Thrones, doesn't it? And in this position, it's white to play. And we can already see that it's a very dynamic position where white has sacrificed the rook on h1. I assume it's a king's gambit to get a very good center. Again, what I'm doing here is evaluating. You need to do this in all your own games. A very good way to get better is also look at random positions in chess books, chess magazines. Don't look at the reading underneath it, but try to evaluate it first. Because if you can quickly evaluate a position, you really are going to find it helps your game immensely by finding the right plans. And I mean, here white clearly has good compensation, but now Vladimir says that we should start an immediate attack against f7 with bishop takes f7 check. And I'm afraid to say this is one case where it's not actually the best move. And he claims that, you know, this is winning for white, but it's not. With the idea that after king to f7, white plays knight to d5. And this knight d5 move is rapidly trying to get the bishop into f4 and the knight taking here. So it kind of seems very scary. And the line he now gives is bishop to e7. Bishop takes f4. And this line is good for white. Queen to h4, knight to f3. And now a very nice line, queen to h1 check, queen takes a1, knight to e5 check, and now queen to h5 check. And it's clear to see here that white has a brilliant winning attack. And there's a very nice way to win after g6, knight to c7 check. If king to d8, knight f7 is mate. So king f8, and we keep attacking aggressively. And now a lovely move, knight to e8. And this is threatening unstoppable checkmates here. And this is one beautiful finish. But one thing we've got to do in chess, and one thing we've got to do in our own games, is always to consider our opponent's best defensive moves. And before playing this move, it must, and it should have been considered that after the idea of knight d5, rather than retreating the bishop, what other options does black have to defend? And a much more natural move here would be to develop a piece with the simple move knight to c6. And now, after the intended bishop takes f4, a much more active move, queen to h1, making sure white can not develop that knight. And around here, white's compensation is not enough. You can try something like queen f2, but now, as we mentioned before, if you give your opponent time, and this move is a slow move, and black has rook f8 coming and castling, this is losing for white. So this is basic, I would say, calculation. You know, before you play this move, it looks very tempting, and you'd have to calculate knight d5. You might have worked out in that variation that bishop e7 was losing, but make sure you keep your eyes open for all of your opponent's defensive possibilities. It would be very tempting to play this move quickly because it's like, oh yeah, lovely, in we go, beautiful, checkmate. But you've got to sit on your hands, one of the first rules of chess. And a much better move in this position is the simple knight d5 immediately. And this move is just crushing. There's no need for fireworks. And this is one case where Vladimir does get his original analysis wrong. And in this position, we are threatening a multitude of things. And now, if knight here, well, we don't need to go crazy. We can simply take on c7 after taking on f4. And after this move, if black plays some passive move such as bishop a5 to defend that one, then white's pieces are just flying into the game with bishop takes f4. And it's easy to see this development advantage is going to be crushing. So there we go. Make sure you consider your opponent's best defensive moves. And we can see that f7 was a theme there, but it didn't quite work. And it's not always going to work. So it's not always going to be white who has the fun. And this next position, this next example is another very common theme, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen before. Now, it's occurred in the Olympiad in 1936. Sorry, I'm just checking where it was. Munich Olympiad. And not even sure of the nations of the players, but we have Agresen versus Rud. Maybe Agresen sounds a bit Icelandic to me. But again, the first thing to do in such a position is to assess it. And we're looking at this from the side of the attacker, which I'm going to do throughout this course. It makes more sense to me. And here, it's a pretty solid pawn structure with not too much going on, but black has the two main things we've talked about so far. He has this half-open e-file. There's two blockaders there, the bishop and the pawn. So we're now bringing in another point of contact, point of attack, the pawn on e3 and the bishop there. But if we can get rid of these or force our way through, obviously the e-file is going to be a very promising avenue of attack. And we've also got these very tricky knights. And the next tactic is a common tactical theme in these types of positions. Had white been allowed to play one more move here, let's say we play bishop d7, which is a pretty weak move. What's the bishop doing there? Bishops are okay to be left on the original squares because they can quickly come into the game straight in the game later on. You don't need to worry too much about the development of your bishops. Knights are much more important. But had black played this move, white would simply castle, and there's no real advantage here with white having d4 square for his knight. But of course, there is a strong idea, and it involves this weak f2 square. I'm sure you can see it. Try calculating now all the variations, and then you can compare your calculation to my calculation. It's black to play and to gain a winning position, winning attack. Pause now if you need to. Well, of course, we start with knight takes f2, ripping open the white king. This f2 square in this case is the weakness. Just before white is able to get a knight there to defend it. And now after king takes f2, the other knight comes in. And we have these at least three pieces, maybe the bishop attacking, so a very good number. Pressure on this f-file and e-file. And in this position, we have dark square pressure. White's dark squares are incredibly weak. Where does the king go? Well, the white king goes back to e1, which is the best chance here. Hopefully you worked out that if it goes to f1, we just win the queen. We don't need to analyze anymore. And even better for us, if it goes there, our queen comes into f2. And if king to g3, well, we should be looking for the most aggressive moves. And of course, checks are the most aggressive moves. So queen to c7 check. And this position is winning because white's king side is far too exposed. The king is going to have to come somewhere ridiculous like h4. And you don't even need to really calculate more here. I mean, you could see that the knight coming into this square and here is going to lead to disaster, but very easy. And after queen to e1, now you have a choice. What do you take on e3 with? And whenever you're attacking, you've got to obviously pick the choice that causes your opponent the most problems and creates the most threats and uses your pieces in the best way. And queen takes doesn't actually create many threats. This is only one check. It's maybe defendable. But knight takes attacks the queen and is going to grab another pawn. Queen d2, and now a very nice move here. Rather than grabbing this pawn, remember white can't castle anymore. The knight is in an ideal square. Black increases the pressure with d4. And this is a very, very clever tactic. You're bringing in another piece to attack, another unit. The more you can bring in when your opponent is in a bad situation, the better. Now, I did say earlier, when you sacrifice, you have to continue with aggressive play. But actually, in this position, you have a good control of the position because white doesn't have a way to easily consolidate. So you've got a little bit more time. But d4 is very nice. The point being, if queen takes, knight c2. And if knight takes here, well, can you see the idea to get the piece back with a winning position? Check, g3, takes, knight c2. I'm not always going to play the moves on the board, and that is on purpose. It's not just because I'm lazy. Everyone could be lazy, but I'm not being lazy in this instant. It's actually because I want you to not just be spoon-fed the solutions, but to try to visualize the lines as well. So pause if you didn't see that and just go over it again. Then you'll spot things better. So the knight now is forced back to a passive square, and only now knight takes g2. This pawn is going to be a useful attacking unit. King f2, and even though there may be no immediate win, with knight to h4, it's clear black has an awesome attack here. And this is the kind of position which you're going to have more faith going into. Because when you originally did the sacrifice, you might have got to this position and said, okay, well, it's not winning. Maybe I shouldn't sacrifice then. But you've got to be brave and you've got to reevaluate at the end of your calculations. And I assume this would be at the end of the calculations. And here, I think it's very easy to see that this is promising. White's pieces are tied up. We have a great e-file. We have pressure with the knight, ready to get rid of another defender. Our bishop is dangerous, and the white king is exposed. On top of that, we even have material equality. Now, that is enough to get us to this point. We don't need to calculate more and to evaluate that this sacrifice is a much better option if we all go all the way back to the start than allowing white to castle with a very long, hard game ahead of us. Now, the game ended with rook f1. And now, remember I said the bishops can fly into the game because they're long-range pieces. Well, this is an example. Bishop h3. Rook g1. Rook d8. Black brings in the last piece, those reinforcements in the position. Rook g3. d3. That pawn doing a very good job. Bishop takes d3. Knight takes f3, eliminating some defenders. And now the queen comes in, and after rook g3, there's another very nice tactic here. Can you see the tactic? Have a little look. Pause now. Pausing now is a good time to pause. Well, the move is rook takes d3. And this is very clever because after queen takes d3 forced, queen to f4 check, and our queen is entering into the position with mate. If king to g1, rook to e1, and after queen to f3, queen to d2, and rook to e1 anyway. And obviously, this is the end. Our only friend, the end. So another very nice game there, and that was very powerful display from the player, the black pieces, Rad. And he combined there many different techniques, but the thing that I really liked about that is this d4 move and the way he wasn't in such a rush because he, realized he didn't have to play so quickly, but he did use all of his pieces. How he got his bishop and rook in the game was brilliant play. I mean, a sacrifice is not just going to win you the game, it's how you play after that. Don't get too carried away. If you do get a chance to sacrifice and you know it's a promising position, you've only done a little bit of the work. Don't relax. Well, just to show you that that last game was not a one-off, this idea and this kind of attacking play does crop up quite commonly. It's one of these common attacking patterns that you will benefit a lot from learning and being able to use in your own games. And this next game, played in 1922 between the famous player Reti and Wolf, what a great name, demonstrates this same technique with the knights on e5 and g4. So you've got to recognize the patterns. And one thing I think will help you get the most out of this course is, once I show you an attacking formation, attacking play that obviously came from this great book, The Art of Attack. I didn't come up with these examples, but I'm trying to, explain them in the best way I can. After I've shown you it, put the board away, maybe turn your screen off, whatever you need to do, and just close your eyes. That's another way of doing it. You can just close your eyes and think, well, hang on a minute, where were the pieces, the critical pieces in that position? What squares were they on and how did they work? Because just by watching it yourself, you might not remember, but by trying to actually use those pieces in your own mind, you're getting over that lazy sort of way of just sitting back and watching, and you're trying to picture it. So in that position, if you say, okay, that attack worked because there was knight on e5, knight on g4, queen on e7, rook on e8, knight takes f2, opens up the way to e3, and black gets a winning attack. If you start to think like that, it will get more set in your mind. Trust me, it does. So maybe do that. With each of these puzzles, close your eyes afterwards and think, okay, what were the key pieces in that one that made it work? What was the key lesson there? Just to give you that little bit extra from this course. Now, this next game won the Brilliancy Prize in this tournament for very good reason. And it's the same kind of technique. We'll go through the opening moves reasonably quickly. So Reti with white, and in this one, well, the opening started very solidly, the Queen's Gambit. And another thing I would like to say, if you want to create brilliant attacking games, I did say you had to pick the right openings, but there's a fine line between picking the right openings and going completely mad. You still need to abide by the rules and foundations of chess. Only attack from a position of strength, only attack when it's called for, and, don't try to force things in an unnatural way. Games will always get complicated. You don't need to worry about attacking. It will happen. You will get a chance. Be a bit patient sometimes to do it. Now, bishop g5. These are very normal developing moves. e3, castles, knight to f3, nothing spectacular. Rook c1, c6, queen c2, and now a6. And this is aiming to try and do something with b5. And here c5 was played. And in this position, this is actually a little bit unsound, as given by the author, because you're closing the center down as white, you're relieving the pressure on d5, so you're making a break with e5 much more attractive for black. Because now when black plays this move, he doesn't have to fear about any pressure on the c-file. So white may have been advised to avoid this. Black now goes for e5 immediately. And the author does give this an exclamation mark in the book, and even a revised version, but it's actually an inaccuracy. I mean, going for e5 is the right idea, but here it's a little bit rushed, and black should first play a move kicking that bishop away, or even b6. b6 is another way to undermine this thing. e5 is going to come. Don't rush it. Let's have a look what happened. e5, white took on e5. Knight to g4, and this is clearly the idea. And now white plays a bad move. Had white played bishop f4 here, in actual fact, black's strategy has not worked, because h3 is coming and the knight's going to be forced back to h6, which is a terrible square. Yes, you can win the pawn on c5, but I don't like this kind of position where the black king becomes exposed. So white is very obliging here and takes on e7. And now black's position is perfectly fine. Knight a4, rook to e8. You can see it's nearly exactly the same setup of those pieces. And if you memorize that, you'll be able to recognize this way of playing in your games. That's the key thing. Bishop d3, there's no point losing the pawn on h2, so h6. Knight d4, knight takes e5, and now a key mistake here. White really had to castle, knight to b6. And it may look like black has to move this rook, and I think had you not been aware of these ideas we saw in the last game, you might just move the rook here without thinking. But we have the same setup. The 4 pieces are in the same position. And here black can pull off the same maneuver. Knight takes f2. And this is just busting the way through the middle of the board before white gets a chance to castle. In chess, you've got to take your opportunities. If you don't take them, you're going to, well, obviously perform so much worse. Now, what can white do here? The problem white has is he can't go queen takes f2 because knight takes d3 is just crushing. And if king takes f2, we have the same thing as last time, knight g4 check. And if king e1, in this situation, and again, every situation is going to be different, queen takes e3 is stronger, because there's a little bit more urgency here, and we're going to win this knight or start a big attack. The queen can't block because of c1. So knight e2 is the only way to try and keep that knight. And now a very nice move. And this again goes back to something we looked at earlier, and that is this piece on the e file is the key piece. Remember that? This is the one piece that's stopping our attack. We want to undermine that piece. And a beautiful move now, bishop f5. And this is undermining that piece. So after bishop takes f5, we can check on f2, and we're now going to win the queen with either a rook or a knight coming in to e3 or e2. So, you know, even with these standard, and they're becoming standard attacking ideas, you need to think they're all going to be unique. Which one do you take on e3 with? In this case, queen takes much stronger. Now, it should be pointed out that king g3 is just far too exposed there. Queen e5 check, and the queen is going to come over to g5 and come into here with, you know, a forcing win. So after knight takes f2, white, you know, clearly is blundered. He tried bishop to h7 check, thinking that the bishop was one of the main problems he has. And now he tries castling. Now, had he tried taking on f2, then again, the knight check and queen to e3 is crushing, because you don't even have this point of defense that we kind of had before. And the queen is coming into this square again, or the knight. So this is just clearly winning for black. But black had seen a little bit further after castling. Maybe Reti had got to this position and thought, okay, I'm attacking 2 pieces. And this again shows you that the further a person can calculate, the better player they're going to become. Calculation is really the mechanics behind all of these. Is you know, what makes the physics work, and that's what you've got to work on. And here, well, the simple move, knight on f to g4 keeps the attack going. White is forced to take the rook, otherwise he's lost. And now knight takes e3. And here, black is simply going to take the rook, go g6, win the bishop back with a 2-pawn advantage. So queen e2 played, knight takes f1. If we can take the bishop, we're winning. So the bishop moves away. But the tactic that really makes this a win is knight takes h2. And the idea is the queen can come and win that piece, so the knight is not trapped. And after knight b6, well, I like this next move. Black doesn't back down. If you can play actively, you should always play actively. Always look for the most aggressive move. Checks, captures, especially in complex attacking positions like this. And here, knight on e to f3 is best. Point being, after it's captured, we can come into g5, picking up that rook or the queen. And this is horrendous for white. White tried king takes here, but the king is too exposed, and after queen to e5 check, and now queen takes b2 check, and queen takes b1, that queen is hoovering up everything, and it's clear to see that with some careful moves here, black is completely winning, and black forces resignation after bishop to f5. So again, the same pattern. Watch out for these patterns. The same kind of technique in a slightly different position. you always have to calculate these things, but watch out for these patterns in your own games. I've used them before. I'm sure you will get a chance at some point in the future. So we're going to conclude this chapter with one more example from a very famous game and, a great of previous years, Rubinstein. Rubinstein with the black pieces, and we're sitting on his side here, defeats another very strong player, Max Euell, world champion from Holland, played in 1921 in The Hague. And again, this is combining what we've looked at already, ideas against f7 and f2. And as we can see, some of these top players have fallen for this. So if these guys can fall for this, world champions, then it's likely, this can happen in your own games as well at some point. And we saw Reti fall into this, and now Max Euell. So the opening stage, we have a Sicilian. And again, we see this knight f6 move, which was, I suppose, a bit trendy around this part in history, but not so much anymore for good reason. White plays the correct e5, but now plays d4, which is not a bad move. But as we saw previously, knight c3 seems to be the nice, developing, simple way to play against this. And now after d4, captures, queen takes d4, e6, and now c4, which is the first mistake. This is the first weak move. Now, this is one of those moves which is artificially aggressive. You're aggressively attacking the knight, but you're not really improving your position by doing this. A much better move would be to develop. What does that pawn push actually gain? It gains the tempo maybe, but surely you can gain the tempo and develop a piece. And bishop c4 here would make a lot more sense because you're now getting ready to castle, you're attacking the piece, you're developing. The c4 move doesn't really help white's position. Black gains the tempo against the queen and now moves the knight to e7. And this is a very clever idea because this pawn on e5 is, if anything, a little bit overextended, and black is aiming to come round and to try and win that one. So he's looking for the best square for his knights. It's very important to find good squares for your knights. I see so many lower rated players just developing their knights without any idea where they want to put them in the future. When you develop your knights, you should be knowing with that knight where it wants to end up. If you don't, you're doing something wrong. So on like move 1 or 2, if you're bringing your knight out there, where do you want to put that in the middle game? These small things will help you improve. Bishop d2, knight g6, and now queen e2 to defend, queen c7, white defends it, and now b6, white continuing with black continuing with a developing strategy. And white takes a bit of another luxury now here. I mean, this is a move which I'm a fan of normally, and I'd be very tempted to play here, but because you put your queen on e2, it's certainly time to think about development because you need to get your bishop in the game to complete that. And I think a very sensible move here, which is okay, would be g3. And in this position, you might lose a pawn after bishop b7, bishop g2, knight takes here. But maybe it's even got to that stage. I understand why you don't want to lose a pawn though. So h4 played. But now d6 and black's pieces really start to fly. And again, Rubinstein playing a great game so far. Pawn takes d6, bishop takes d6. Black is now better developed and he is more powerful in the center of the board because he has these knights causing more problems, gaining tempo against the queen. Knight b d2 was played. If bishop takes g7, white is losing more time. And after rook g8, bishop c3, knight to f4 will immediately win the pawn back with the initiative. So white tries to develop. And now black takes his opportunity. Again, I think a lot of people here would just try to play bishop b7 and try to castle probably queenside. But if you've got a chance to punish your opponent, then you should do. And this is something you've got to watch out for. As we said before, how can we evaluate when it's time to do that? Well, we can evaluate if our opponent has played moves which we seem to think are a bit odd. And he has done here. He's put his queen on e2. Let's punish it. knight to f4. And here Max Euler plays another dubious move, queen e3. This is again dubious because it's going to be a target to more attack. Queen to d1 was necessary, and this is necessary so black doesn't gain time to attack the queen with such moves as bishop c5 and f5. But after bishop b7, this is maybe not so bad for white. White can try g3 and he's gaining his tempo back. And, you know, this knight f4 move, even though it might not gain a decisive advantage, it's the right way to play because let's think, if your opponent plays perfectly in a game of chess, you're not going to win anyway, are you? It's like playing a computer. But what you've got to do to win a game of chess is to put your opponent under as much pressure as you can by constantly creating threats, by constantly giving your opponent the opportunity to go wrong. Then he's more likely to go wrong and you're more likely to win. You're not playing a computer, remember that. So after queen e3, this is such a mistake. And with bishop c5, queen e4, f5, tempo, 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 the queen has to make its sixth move, queen c2, and this is not really what it wants to be doing. Black now simply castles, g3 played. Now the knight should have come actually to h5 because then you have ideas of sacrificing on g3. Knight g6 is not as good because now h5 is a little bit annoying. But because of white's sort of weak play, black is now able to centralize with knight e5. And everything is still going well for black because the white king is there and black has this good pressure. And again, you've got to look for these weaknesses. And this whole part is about the weakness of f2 or f7. f2 is weak. White takes on e5 and now plays b4. And this is really asking for it. Now, if we go back before b4, we can see that white cannot castle because of bishop takes f2. So he tries to get out of his problems with that with some tactics involving this one. But it promotes it forces black to play a good move. So it's not a wise idea. And in this type of position, a sacrifice of 2 pawns for a piece is going to work very well for black because, again, we can evaluate after the sequence that white's king is very exposed and black is going to have, as we will see, the knight, queen and bishop attacking 3 pieces. 3 pieces is a good number to attack. Normally, really sufficient, too many. So, all things considered, white should have tried here instead of this b4 move, bishop g2. This was the last chance to save the game. And now bishop takes f2 is not as clear now because white has an extra developed piece. Clearly this line is still very dangerous, as we're going to see, but it's better for white. And, you know, in a game situation, even if you don't like this, if it's better than your other options, you have to go for it. You have to try to play your best options, even if you don't like them. If black had played more conservative with bishop b7, then white can hold on by taking that one and playing rook to f1. It's not nice after knight g4, but there's some chances to hold here. Now b4, again, this is a key situation. In a game of chess, you're going to get really only 2 or 3 critical moments normally. If you don't take these moments and use them as much to your advantage as you can, any edge you've got, any hope of an edge is going to disappear. And in this position, if you retreat now, you're losing a lot of energy. So you've got to look for the most aggressive option, and you should see that f2 is a weakness. And by capturing on f2 and following up with knight g4, it should be clear to see you're going to get a great attack. You don't even need to calculate that far. I mean, also knight e3 is a problem here, but you could sort of calculate to this position and kind of even here see that, okay, with a move such as bishop b7, you're going to get enough play here. Funnily enough, the move played in the game, queen takes g3, is very dangerous for white, but now white misses a very key defensive move that's, again, not noted in the original book. This looks very scary, but white does have a lot of pieces, and you can always try to defend your pieces. In the game, bishop d4 was played, and this is the wrong way to defend. Much better way to defend would have been queen d3, and actually here it's not so clear at all. White has good chances to defend, but the position is still dangerous with the rook coming in, but white is using his most powerful piece to defend. Bishop d4 was played, and now bishop b7, that piece eventually gets in. Rook h3, queen d6, and black doesn't even need to force it. He can now use his pawns because of the weak position of the king. Queen c3, e5. White has averted the direct mating attack, but now black's centralized pawns here really come into their own. They're controlling so many squares in the middle of the board there. They are worth a piece, it's clear. Bishop g1, and let's roll and roll and roll and roll and here we go, f4, and this is horrendous for white. c5, queen h6. This queen will try to have some power on that diagonal later on. King e1, roll and roll and roll and e4. Rook h4, and now queen g5, and this position has become more and more hopeless for white. Queen h3, and now knight e3. Now knight e3 requires a bit of thought because you're transforming the position somewhat. I mean, another little tip here is not to get too carried away with advantages you have. For example, these two pawns, you might want to stick with them forever. You might think, I love those pawns so much, I don't want to ever distract them. I'm going to sit there. But knight e3 is clearly a proactive and one of the most aggressive moves. And you should always, again, as I say, look for the most aggressive moves. So if it does work, yes, you're transforming the position. But if it does work, it's going to be the most forcing and it's going to put your opponent under the most pressure. And indeed, knight e3 does work here. And after this has to be taken, it's too strong. Pawn takes e3, check, knight to f1. Well, queen to f6 now is the key idea. Swapping one advantage for another. And this is something you really must do in your own games. Make sure you don't get carried away with one edge. You can transform it. Bobby Fischer was maybe the most famous player who transformed advantages in one form to another. And this is something you really have to look out for. And it's clear to see in this position, that there's nothing that can be done for white. The queen is either coming in on any dart square there, even with the rook coming in, and white resigned in a hopeless situation. So another example there of the pressure against f2. This one in not as obvious way, but energy is something we're seeing throughout these ideas and something I hope you're going to be able to use to get some lovely little wins there. Let's do a little bit of Rubinsteining on our opponent. Oh yeah.